With the regular season still a month away, the Seahawks have a chance to get major star power back in time for their first game against the Rams. We'll be breaking it all down in our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined on this Monday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and guest host Shawn Walli joining us as well. We're looking forward to diving into a number of training camp related topics today. And a special thanks, as always, to the 12s for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it, whether you're listening in nearby Northern California or way down in Ethiopia. We've got a wide reach of listeners. We greatly appreciate all of you tuning in to the show each and every day. We're going to be answering your mailbag questions. We've got observations from training camp practices number 9 and 10 as well. So let's get to it. This episode is brought your way by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a white tech hat with any order. You will want to take advantage of this offer, and you won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. There have been several notable players that have been on the PUP list for the entirety of training camp so far, but that is starting to change for the Seahawks. Yesterday, Riq Woolen being activated from the PUP list and returning to practice. They're easing him back in. And from what Pete Carroll said, it sounds like Jamal Adams and Jordyn Brooks are both getting very close to making their much anticipated return to the field. And Rob, I'm going to flip it over to you first here. I know there's one player in particular out of these three that you are especially excited that now we have gotten to see him back on the field, even though the Seahawks are going to be very slow getting him back into the starting lineup and making sure that he's ready to go for the start of the regular season.
Yeah, I think that Riq Woolen, to me, I think is a huge story here that Seattle is able to get him back on the field, on the PUP, off the PUP list, and get him back on the field, as I mentioned. And, I think that that's critical because we saw the immediate impact that he had a year ago. We've talked so much about how I personally feel that he should have been the defensive rookie of the year. And yet the Seahawks, kind of came back and brought in Devin Witherspoon, number 5 overall selection. So clearly the Seahawks are believing that if they can kind of resurrect the Legion of Boom in the secondary, then they should be able to compete immediately. That all falls apart if you don't have Riq Woolen on the field with you. So the fact that he is back on the field, just knowing the way that you have some young quarterbacks in the rest of the NFC West, I think it's absolutely critical that the pass rush is, remains a little bit of a concern for the Seahawks. And so to me, as big as Jordyn Brooks and Jamal Adams might be in their return, hopefully soon, I think getting Riq Woolen back onto the field as early as possible is super important for the Seahawks, because while you believe that you have a young up-and-coming star in Witherspoon, you've got a quality veteran, Mike Jackson. Riq Woolen is really the upside guy, the guy that can be that takeaway player. He proved that a year ago. And so I think that, again, this is huge news for the Seahawks to get Riq Woolen back onto the field because he is already a proven commodity.
And Shawn, you look at the other two players. Pete Carroll yesterday after practice said that Jordyn Brooks is real close, and he indicated that Jamal Adams is also making great progress. Both these guys have been participating in the walkthroughs. They are running full speed. They're cutting. So we've gotten all these great updates, and yet there's still a month till the start of the season. They've got Bobby Wagner, Devin Bush at linebacker. They brought in Julian Love at safety. So there really isn't a reason to rush these guys back at this point, and yet both of them are so important to this defense being able to reach its potential this upcoming season. I think we're having a connection issue. I don't think Shawn is hearing our stuff coming through. Unfortunately, we've been trying to work on this. So, Rob, I'm going to swing it back over to you on Adams and Brooks while we try to get Shawn's connection figured out over on that side. And these are two guys that are especially important for this Seahawks defense to get him back on the field.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think that, with Jordyn Brooks, you already have a proven commodity. We know what Jordyn Brooks is. Obviously, he's coming off a significant injury, but still, you feel like you already know what Jordyn Brooks is. With Jamal Adams, to me, as I mentioned before with Riq Woolen, you're talking about a guy who is a truly an impact player, a guy that has just made the type of plays that can absolutely change games. And Jordyn Brooks, as good as he has been, as consistent and reliable as he's been, he has not demonstrated the type of game-breaking potential, that Riq Woolen has demonstrated in terms of the turnovers and things like that, and what Jamal Adams has already demonstrated in terms of his ability as a sack master. Seattle's entire defense is built around what Jamal Adams might be able to provide the Seahawks. So getting Jamal Adams back to me is critical. If you are able to use him in the way that the Seahawks are hoping to, then I think that their defense goes in a completely different stratosphere than what they could be. Look, I have all due respect to Julian Love, good football player, a more well-rounded player than Jamal Adams is, but he's not the pass rusher that Jamal Adams is. So to me, to get Jamal Adams back onto the field, for one, I think it adds to Seattle's toughness. I think it adds to Seattle's versatility. I think it adds, again, to their big play potential. And so while I'm excited about Jordyn Brooks, I think that the depth at safety is better, frankly, than it is at inside linebacker, at least the proven depth at that position. Then I think you can make a sound argument for linebacker Jordyn Brooks being even more important than Jamal Adams is. I mean, just because of the fact that obviously Jamal Adams hasn't been on the field for the Seahawks. But in terms of if you want to go from a playoff contender to a Super Bowl contender, then I think number 33 is critical for the Seahawks to get him back onto the field as quickly as possible, develop that rapport, because obviously there's a lot of moving parts in that secondary, as we talked about before, with Riq Woolen and the rookie Devin Witherspoon coming in, expected to play significant time as a rookie.
Those of you that are listening to the podcast, we're hoping to get Shawn Walli's connection figured out. Shawn is going to be joining the team for a few podcasts a week. This is his first show. And so, of course, we've had some of those technical issues that we're trying to work through getting him set up. So hopefully we have him back on here soon and we can get some thoughts on these injuries from Shawn and, of course, our training camp observations as well as our upcoming mailbag. But from my perspective, Robin, we talked about this quite a bit during the offseason because these guys, obviously this is not news that these players, especially Jordyn Brooks and Jamal Adams, were going to be coming off significant injuries. Riq Woolen had his injury in May, so that was a later development, but it also was not near as significant as the other two injuries were. So we've had a chance to look at these a number of times, but I'm going to continue reiterating what I've said dating back to February. To me, number 33 of these three players, because of his unique skill set, he's the biggest wild card because he's had multiple injuries. But if you have Jamal Adams on the field doing what he does best, and you have maximized his skill set, you now have Julian Love that can play that third safety role, that can move around. You can do some fun stuff with him. But Jamal Adams' ability to be a game wrecker when healthy, I still think is the biggest difference maker of these three. Riq Woolen is a fantastic football player, and so is Jordyn Brooks. But Seattle's got such an abundance of corners that at least for a few weeks, if Woolen missed the first couple weeks of the season, I feel like they could be fine with the corners they have. I still feel like the absence of Jamal Adams would probably be felt a little bit more just because of his unique skill set and the things you can do with him. And you've got Bobby Wagner, you got Devin Bush, who have both started a lot of games in the NFL. So Jordyn Brooks ends up missing a few games. I feel like they can get by at that position as well. It's not that they don't have the talent at all three spots. They've done a good job getting insurance at every position group. But I just feel like from a uniqueness standpoint that getting Jamal Adams back on the field, that would be a significant addition for the Seattle Seahawks to get back before week one and be able to at least get him on the field here for a few weeks to get his feet back underneath him so that he can be able to play at a high level, hopefully, when you start the season. Coming up next, we're going to be answering your mailbag questions. We're hoping it's going to be all three of the hosts. We're still trying to work on getting Shawn hooked up and so we can answer those, but we have a ton of great questions about the Seahawks, the NFL coming our way from our diehard listeners. We're looking forward to answering those here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. that is brought your way by Bird Dogs. Putting it simply, Bird Dogs make you look and feel good. You won't want to take them off. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. Unlike regular shorts, Bird Dogs aren't made of a stiff, restricting cotton, keeping you comfortable year-round. Take my word for it, whether I'm heading to LA to cover a tough road game for the Seahawks or chilling at my house preparing for a podcast, I'm always sporting Bird Dog shorts and joggers because they're extremely comfortable. They don't restrict movement while keeping the slim look. Certainly need that these days. And the sweat-wicking fabric keeps me cool and dry all day long, no matter the elements. I can't recommend Bird Dogs enough. You'll want to wear them all day, every day. Go to birddogs.com/LockedInNFL or enter the promo code LockedInNFL for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedInNFL or promo code LockedInNFL for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. We're really eager to get Shawn Walli on as the third host on today's show, but dealing with some major tech issues, so our apologies on that end. But Rob, you and I, we're used to talking Seahawks on Monday, so we're going to continue rolling. We greatly appreciate all the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For our everydayers, coming up on our Tuesday show, we're going to be taking a dive into the latest training camp practice and taking a look at what to expect on offense in Seattle's upcoming Thursday preseason game against the Vikings. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to your mailbag questions here on our Monday mailbag. We got tons of questions from the 12s out there. And Rob, the first question that we're going to throw out here was actually asked to us by about 50 people today. And real quick, hopefully we can make this quick, but your thoughts on what is taking place in the Pac-12, or now the soon-to-be defunct Pac-12, and college football.
Well, it's tough, just because I'm I guess I'm sentimental. I grew up watching the Huskies, play Pac-12 football. One of the highlights of my career was, of course, going to watch the Seahawks play in the Super Bowl, but they're very much going to see the Huskies play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl a few years ago. And, I'm excited to see the Huskies play Ohio State year in and year out, or Michigan year in and year out, and all of that. So I definitely want to focus in on the positives. But right now, to not have the Apple Cup, at least the way that we've always known it, and just all of the other rivalries that are out there in the Pac-12, and not just about football. I mean, that's the thing, is that to me, this is a story that is just focused in on football. But I think about, again, specifically with the University of Washington, just for a moment here, but the incredible things that, say, the women's fast pitch team has done, that the men's basketball team has done, and so many other sports. So, yes, as a Pac-12 fan all my life, it just kind of hurts my heart a little bit. I hate that greed is taking over not only college sports, but it seems like just the entire world. But at the same time, I also acknowledge that that's the way things are going. And if the University of Washington, again, I'm going to focus in there for a moment, the University of Washington wants to compete for a national championship, then if you win consistently in the Big Ten, you are going to get that opportunity. So I guess rather than kind of bemoaning the past and some things I cannot change, I guess I would try to look to the future and the possibilities that this new realignment presents, and then just kind of a tip of the cap to Washington State, Oregon State, Stanford, and Cal for quality programs that wherever they are playing in 2023, football or otherwise, I am very much going to remain fans of those programs as well.
Yeah, I'm going to let you be the one that's more the peacekeeper. This just infuriates me. I'm just not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, and I'm a Big Ten guy. I grew up in Indiana, and so I watched the Big Ten religiously. I still watch the Big Ten religiously now living out west. But it's just so hard for me to deal with the idea now that, it's funny because you've got Northwestern in the Big Ten, but they're located in Evanston near Chicago. Like, it's not a school in the Northwest, but now there's actually two Northwest schools now in the conference. And then you've got two Southern California teams as well. Like, I guess the fact there's now four of them makes it a little better because they're going to have more games against each other that limit the travel a little bit. But what do you do when your fast pitch softball team's got to fly from Seattle all the way to Rutgers in New Jersey. I mean, I think this is going to have a really bad effect on the other sports, but I get the argument is being made. Well, those sports might not exist if we don't make this move because we need this money to be able to fund those sports. So I get it. It's frustrating, though. It's really hard for me as a purist to see all these rivalries get destroyed by money, but that's just the way that the world works. Now, our first question here for you, Rob, coming on Seahawks from Maytown Michael. How systematic is the player evaluation system used to determine roster positions? Does the coaching staff keep some sort of scorecard on players in camp? I don't know that we know how the Seahawks specifically do this, but Rob, I know with your scouting background that this is something that intrigues you.
Well, definitely. I think that the easy answer is yes. I mean, the Seahawks and every other NFL team out there, Corbin, are absolutely evaluating players in every single way that you can possibly imagine. I don't know that they literally are keeping a scorecard out there, but there are so many cameras. There are so many analytics in today's game. That's not how I operate. I'm just watching with my own eyes and evaluating players and in the situations that they present themselves. If it's a fourth down or a goal line snap, then I am going to evaluate that particular rep a little bit better than with a little bit more focus than I might for a first down rep right out of the break, in training camp. I'm going to evaluate them differently rather than just kind of keeping a standard scorecard. But I am just one set of eyes, and the Seahawks, of course, have multiple, as does every other NFL team. So I think that, again, what this really comes down to is that, yes, every single repetition matters, whether it be in training camp, whether it be in practice, whether it be in your positional workout just to get yourself onto the team in the first place, and then certainly in the mock games, in the preseason games, all of those things, they all matter. And I think that it's fascinating. And those of you who are watching on YouTube, thank you as always, I should mention, but those of you who are watching might recognize that I'm sitting in a motel room right now. And so I have had an opportunity to kind of go and see other NFL teams and how they're operating training camps. And it's the same thing with every NFL club. They are going to be evaluating these players in every single opportunity they possibly can because it is that competitive. And the Seahawks, in my opinion, have one of the most competitive rosters of all of the clubs that I've seen so far. I mean, every single position, maybe it's not a battle for the starting reps, but it's definitely a battle for the depth. And so, yes, I do think that the Seahawks are very much keeping a scorecard, at least in some manner, for every single position, every single rep. It all matters. Compete, compete, compete.
Next question here coming from Thomas2448 on YouTube. Who do you think reaps the most rewards from Eskridge getting suspended, and why did he get 6 games when Alvin Kamara only got 3? So I'll answer that first, or the second part of that question real quick. We don't know what actually happened there. Nobody has come out and said what went down between D. Eskridge and the mother of his child. We don't know the specifics. The Seahawks aren't going to tell people. Pete Carroll certainly is not going to be telling people what happened. And none of that stuff has become public. We just know that he was arrested. That's all we know. Back in February, there was an incident. We don't know the details behind it. So without the information, I can't tell you. Comparing these issues around the league with these players, it is not as simple as comparing an apple to another apple. It never is. So I can't speak to that and what the NFL did in order to reach those verdicts where one guy gets 6 games, the other guy gets 3. I can't speak to that. As for his absence and who reaps the reward, my answer is much different right now than it was going into the mock game last week. And I don't want to sit here and say that I put too much stock in the mock game because it's just a scrimmage. But Rob, I'm becoming a believer in Jake Bobo. And I was pessimistic about him even coming out of the offseason program because I just think that there is a limit where athleticism, not having enough of it at that position, is a real problem. And yet I keep seeing this guy finding ways to get open, and he's a problem to cover because he's 6'4", over 200 pounds. He's a big bodied guy. He does a great job shielding defenders away from the ball. Like he blocks people out, and it's fun to watch. He had 7 catches in the mock game, and some of them were difficult catches. And he almost had an 8th one where Geno Smith, I think, was purposely trying to throw it out of bounds, and he somehow caught the ball and almost got his feet down in bounds. So I think Jake Bobo right now, with his ability to run routes from the slot and the fact that both quarterbacks seem to be very confident throwing the football his way, And Riq Young's banged up right now too. So you need another receiver that's got size. Jake Bobo has that. He keeps showing that speed is only part of the equation with the way he's getting open. But if you can get a healthy Riq Young back, he's obviously somebody I think benefits. Cade Johnson, another player. But Bobo is the one that his stock has gone up a lot for me, just seeing what he has done the last few padded practices and what we saw in that mock scrimmage game. Next question here for Rob. Coming from Hawk Astrologer, if we get Jamal Adams and Jordyn Brooks back healthy, which two positions on defense are most important to success this year and why?
Well, it feels like in a way a loaded question, just because I do feel like if you get Adams and Brooks back, then that's solving two of the biggest questions on this club. I think that regardless of whether Adams and Brooks come back and are the dominant players that they were previously, then it still remains the biggest area of concern for me, at least, is the interior of the defensive line, as we've talked about so many different times. Look, I'm a big fan of Jarran Reed. I'm a big fan of Cameron Young, the rookie that Seattle selected to take that nose guard position. The fact that Seattle continues to rotate players' bodies at that nose guard defensive tackle positions. We've seen guys like Rod Perry. We've seen guys like Big Robert Cooper from Florida State, and they're continuing to rotate. I think that the Seahawks have some concerns that interior of the defensive line. And again, this is the club that finished 30th in the NFL in run defense a year ago. So that to me is the easy answer. Then I would argue the pass rusher. Always pass rusher, because again, I feel confident in Seattle's depth at the safety position. Bringing back Julian Love, and unfortunately, Joey Blount was injured in the practice today, August 7th, and so it remains to be seen what impact that may have on the Seahawks, how severe his injury may be. Certainly, well wishes to Joey Blount, but that was a position that I feel like is one of Seattle's absolute strengths. You get Jamal Adams back, again, I think that strength just becomes, again, one of the best in all of the NFL. And as solid as Jordyn Brooks is, the fact that you got Bobby Wagner, the fact that you got Devin Bush, I really am a believer in some of the young linebackers on Seattle's team. John Radigan, Vi Jones, BBK coming back and playing very well so far. I think those are relatively safe spots. So to me, the two biggest concerns still are along the defensive line, regardless of how quickly that Jordyn Brooks and Jamal Adams return.
Our next question coming from Champion 891971 is Boye Mafe really a threat to snatch Darrell Taylor's starting edge rusher spot? Emphatically, Rob, it's yes. I think at this point that Mafe is probably the favorite to start in week one. And you don't like saying that when a guy's only been out a couple days. And I think Darrell Taylor's trying to get back from that shoulder strain as quick as he can. But what Mafe has done in camp, this is not just Pete Carroll's words. This is what I've seen. He is the most improved player on either side of the football. He has been taking over practice reps. The scrimmage the other night, they could not block him. He and Draymond Jones were living back there in the backfield. Had a forced fumble, even though he said it was an accident. He still knocked it out of Drew Lock's hand. So he's just really taken that big step forward here in year two. And this isn't to say Darrell Taylor isn't going to have a big role still. He's going to play a lot of snaps as long as he's healthy, but it's going to be mostly in that situational pass rusher role that he has excelled at. I just think that Boye Mafe, his run defense and what we're seeing now as a pass rusher, they need another starter that can do both at a high level. And I just haven't seen enough from Darrell Taylor to suggest we're going to see that from him. And now he's given this open door to Boye Mafe. So emphatically, this is a yes to me. And last question here coming from In Utero 1993, Go Nirvana on YouTube. Who will be the odd man out at cornerback? That really is the $1 million question now, Rob, because Riq Woolen is back on the field, even if he is not doing a lot of stuff yet. They're just trying to ease him back into action. He is practicing again. He is active, and you've got Trey Brown. You got Mike Jackson. Artie Burns had like 800 pass breakups in Friday's scrimmage. He was trying to let people know, hey, I'm still here too. Like, this is just an incredibly loaded position group, and yet you can only keep so many of them.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is again, I've argued that I think the cornerback is, Seattle's probably strongest position, I mean, top to bottom. So again, I feel like this is a tough question because in terms of odd man out, in terms of the roster, I think that you got to mention a couple of these undrafted free agents that are trying to make this club. I mean, like I for example, am really high on Lance Boykin from Coastal Carolina. At the same time, I also don't know that he necessarily is going to be in the Seattle's top 4 or 5, and so the player that you mentioned, Artie Burns, to me was the player that I would be kind of focusing on right now as far as being the odd man out, and that I believe that Artie Burns is a legitimate NFL player. He should be on an NFL roster. But the Seahawks are going to prioritize youth. They're going to prioritize upside, not necessarily a player who is quite, maybe is what he is, an Artie Burns. And so to me, Artie Burns is a player that I would kind of mention as a guy that I think should be in an NFL roster, but I don't know necessarily is going to be on Seattle's. I think that he is better suited to play immediately than some of the undrafted free agents that Seattle has. I mentioned Boykin before. Arquan Bush from Cincinnati would be another one. Chris Steele from USC would be another one. There are several that I think can make NFL rosters or NFL practice squads. I don't know that Artie Burns is going to be that guy. But again, it's kind of a difficult question here, because I do think that the Seahawks are absolutely low at the cornerback position, and whoever does not make Seattle's roster or practice squad, I think there's going to be other NFL clubs or perhaps clubs from other leagues that are going to be very much keeping an eye on Seattle secondary.
When we come back, we are going to take a look at observations from the 9th and 10th training camp practice at the VMAC, one non-contact and one padded practice, one that was very physical today at the VMAC. We'll be diving into some offensive and defensive observations coming up next year on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run of the day. It's all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. Unfortunately, we were so excited to have a third guest host on today, and unfortunately dealing with some significant connection-related issues on Shawn Walli's end. So we hope to get him onto the show here in the next couple of days, and hopefully won't have these issues anymore. But he's going to be a really nice asset to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. We're looking forward to him being involved with the program moving forward. With that being said, it is time to talk observations for the Seahawks coming out of practice number 9 and 10. Sunday and Monday practice for the Seahawks. We're getting closer to the first preseason game on Thursday against the Vikings. And Rob, let's talk on the offensive side of the football. You and I always get excited in the trenches talking about offensive line play.
Sure.
Maybe it isn't the sexiest position group to talk about, but the main competition that's taking place there, right guard has not been a competition. It's Phil Haynes' job. But at center, it had been a back-and-forth affair between Evan Brown and rookie Olu Oluwatimi. And yet here the last 4 or 5 days, suddenly, it looks like a front runner is truly emerging at that position and maybe going a little different direction than I anticipated with the way the first week or so of camp went for the Seahawks.
Well, I think that, Evan Brown, it seems like he is kind of pulling away right now. I mean, but again, we're on August 7th, Corbin. I mean, let's give it a month and see what happens. I mean, I am a big fan of Oluwatimi. I will say this. I said this, a month ago, that if the veteran Evan Brown is tied, then he's leading. I mean, basically, that's where it should come down to, because, again, week 1, the regular season, when it actually matters, you are facing off against Aaron Donald and the Los Angeles Rams. So, by the way, the rest of the team's pretty decent too. So, again, I think that's why that Evan Brown deserves to kind of get the benefit of the doubt as the veteran. And so, to me, this is not surprising. I'm not in any way disappointed. I think that Oluwatimi is playing pretty well. At least the training camp practice that I was there, Oluwatimi got a lot of repetitions, and he looked good. But I just think that Evan Brown, again, if this is a competition we talked about before, if there's a scorecard, I think that scorecard is probably pretty even. But I think that you got to go with the guy who has started against NFL competition, is, at least in my opinion, at this point, is a better communicator. I think that's critical. I think if Seattle wants to make sure that they are not just kind of giving away a winnable game, then you have to be able to kind of shore up the middle first before you worry about anything else. And again, we talked about this before with Aaron Donald. That's public enemy number one from a Seattle perspective. So I think Evan Brown gives the Seahawks, at least right now, gives the Seahawks the best opportunity to get a victory in week one. And so I'm not at all surprised that he is at least the leader at this point in the center competition.
Yeah, the experience part is what Pete Carroll pointed out. And this is not typical of Pete Carroll. You might remember a few years ago when Ethan Posick and Kyle Fuller were competing for the starting center job. Even with Posick missing a bunch of time with an injury, he was as guarded as you'll ever see with that position. He was not giving any breadcrumbs like this guy's leading or whatever. He just came out front yesterday like, yeah, Evan Brown is leading. He's ahead. And it's because of that experience. And it's not that I downplayed that. I've talked all offseason about the fact that he has started a bunch of games at center the last few years, and he's been good. I just thought Oluwatimi was going to come in. And as you mentioned, I don't think that this is necessarily against Oluwatimi. From what I've seen, he's played fairly well in the practices for the Seahawks so far. I thought he looked decent in the mock scrimmage, but that number one offense scored in each of the first three drives in that mock game. And one of the things that I noticed is that there was very little pressure coming from the interior. And guess who was at the center position? It was Evan Brown. He has been with the ones in 3 of the last 4 practices when you include that mock scrimmage. So clearly right now there looks to be some decisions being made here by the coaching staff that we feel more comfortable. And who knows how much of a voice Geno Smith has in this as well. Geno Smith may say, hey, look, I like Oluwatimi, but Evan Brown's the veteran and our chemistry right now is better. We don't know if that's what's going on, but the quarterback usually has a presence in that as well. We're talking about the center position. So all those things considered, this is still very much a competition. This is not decided. There's 3 preseason games to go. If Oluwatimi really impresses, he could still win this job, but it does feel like now that you're starting to see the veteran pull away a little bit, that there's some separation and they are giving him more opportunities these last few days, which to me is a big deal. And Carroll's saying up front that he's ahead, that is significant to me as well. As far as another thing on offense, this is kind of a mixed bag for me. Seattle continues to play injury roulette in the backfield. And we saw with Kenny McIntosh in Friday's game, I'm going to admit it, Rob, when I saw the injury on the replay inside the stadium, I thought the worst. I thought McIntosh might have blown his knee out because he got bent in a really awkward position when Levi Bell hit him and forced a fumble coming from the backside. And yet it sounds like there's a chance he could be back very quickly, maybe miss a couple weeks at worst. It is just a grade 1 knee strain. So the Seahawks dodge a bullet there. And oh, by the way, Zach Charbonnet was out in the field running today with pads on, 2 straight practices. So he seems to be trending in the right direction as well. Ken Walker III was running around. He's still not practicing yet, but they'll have him ready to go when the season starts. So overall, it seems like there's a pretty good trajectory, a pretty good prognosis here for all of the backs. Even DJ Dallas with his sore ankle, he was able to run some the other night even with that. All these guys look like they're going to be okay. You just got to hope that you can keep them healthy now the rest of training camp and the preseason, because it just seems like every other day somebody's getting banged up at this position that has a very high attrition rate.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, I mean, I'm on the road. I am going to different training camps and evaluating players for the BC Lions. And one thing I can tell you, Corbin, is without getting into specifics, but the different NFL teams that have been kind enough to allow me into their facilities to go to these training camps. And I am seeing an awful lot of teams that are taking their veteran players and basically putting them in bubble wrap and not allowing any possibility of them getting injured in a meaningless training camp practice when it's clear that they are superstars. So the Seahawks fans out there who are fretting about Ken Walker, I have seen no reason to believe that Ken Walker is not going to be available to hit the ground running, literally and figuratively, for the Seahawks in week 1. I think that they are exercising extreme caution because they know he's a superstar. I think that the Zach Charbonnet and the Kenny McIntoshes of the world, that the Seahawks have such high regard for these two young players that they believe that they both could be starting caliber players for the Seahawks and certainly be very, very good players for them immediately. I think, again, they are exercising extreme caution with these two players. And you mentioned the fact that Kenny McIntosh, it looked like an ugly injury. And I think that this is one of the reasons why the Seahawks continue to pour resources into the running back position, because for one, it does withstand, it does take on an awful lot of punishment. And two, when you're a young player, it's amazing how you can have that flexibility. When you play at big time level, like Georgia Bulldogs, then you've experienced some nicks and bruises and things like that. You know how to kind of shift your body at the very last possible second to be able to try and deflect from those types of major injuries. So it just is an acknowledgement, as Pete Carroll said in his own words, basically what a remarkable athlete Kenny McIntosh is. I think that, again, this is a position that is a concern, but at the same time, I think that Seattle is going to be stronger because they've had a couple of little pops to the jaw, so to speak, throughout this process. But I think they're going to be stronger because of it. The depth at running back, to me, is right there with the depth at cornerback is Seattle's biggest strength and one of the biggest reasons why I have a great deal of optimism for this club moving forward.
And I'm glad that you brought that segue to the cornerback position, because when we're talking observations from these latest 2 training camp practices, you know, a guy who just keeps popping under the radar for doing the right thing and making big plays, it's Trey Brown at the corner position. I don't care that Riq Woolen is back. I'm going to go out and I'm going to keep making plays. Now I'm going to put pressure on Mike Jackson, and that's what makes this competition so much fun. You and I have been in enough training camp practices to know that one-on-one matchups, when they have receivers against corners, very rarely do corners intercept passes in those drills. And Trey Brown had a pick today, and he nearly had a second one, both of them covering curl routes, and both of those plays against Geno Smith. So this guy, he is turning the clock back to before that patellar tendon injury, when he was a really good starter for a handful of games for the Seahawks. He has played at that level, if not better, so far in training camp, and it just adds more mystique to what the Seahawks are going to do at cornerback, because he has looked like not just a starter, a high-quality one in training camp in the mock game so far.
Well, and Corbin, that's one of the things I appreciate about you, sir, in going to these training camps is your ability to kind of recognize the routes being run. And that's going to kind of lead in here to my conversation about Trey Brown. I think, for one, you go back to Trey Brown in Oklahoma. To me, he reminds me in some ways of a Devin Witherspoon in terms that he is a more physical player than you might expect at his size. That has been a priority. It has been absolutely part of the scouting reports of the Seahawks. It's critical at cornerback, and that is not something that is universal among NFL teams at cornerback, but it is with the Seahawks. They want guys who just play, you know, so much more physical, so much more aggressive than most. And I think that's a kind of a departure from, we mentioned Riq Woolen before. I mean, he's just such a phenomenal athlete with such incredible size, but he's very, very different than the other corners on Seattle's roster. With Trey Brown specifically, in that comeback routes, as you mentioned before, he had an interception, almost had a second one. Just think about it from an anatomy perspective. When you have a guy who's 6'4", like a Riq Woolen, it just takes an extra step for a guy like that to be able to plant his feet and charge downhill. But when you're 5'9", 5'10", these shorter corners, you can move a little bit quicker, maybe not gather speed quite as well. I mean, Riq Woolen, his 4.3s are unbelievable, but changing direction is something that shorter players just have a physical body kind of advantage. And Trey Brown's ability to come downhill, be able to create as many pass breakups as he did against elite competition at Oklahoma, and what he's doing here for the Seahawks. Again, I just really like this positional group for the Seahawks. I think that Trey Brown is absolutely a starting caliber corner in the NFL. I think the Seahawks are going to feel, and their fans are going to feel really, really good about this cornerback spot. That's why I didn't even mention Trey Brown as being one of the guys that you have to worry about being on the bubble or whatever. When we talked before about the cornerback position, Trey Brown I think he's competing for starting reps, not competing to be on the roster, despite what some others outside of the building, outside of the Seattle area media might be suggesting.
And Trey Brown's been so good off camp. We've talked about him a lot. I want to pivot a little bit here to close off the show with a guy who, quite frankly, has not impressed me that much for most of his first training camp, and then today had a wake-up call, and that is Derick Hall. With Darrell Taylor being sidelined, he was a player that I picked as one of my picks to click in Friday's mock game. I've seen a few flashes of his ability to rush with power and his quickness, but there just hasn't been that breakthrough practice. Well, he had that today at the VMAC with the pads on in their blitz period in a 4-play sequence. He had 2 quick whistles that were caused by what would have been sacks. And so to see that coming out party, we know that Derick Hall has a lot of talent, but it just hasn't come together yet for him. This is a really encouraging sign, especially with Darrell Taylor still out. Hey, Derick Hall, you've still got an opportunity in front of you. I don't know that you can play for a starting job at this point because of how well Boye Mafe has played, but we know the athleticism. We know the motor. We know the power at 255, 260 pounds that Derick Hall brings to the equation. We know the ability to get in the backfield against the run. You want to see that translate, and so it sounds like today that he was finally able to have a breakthrough, because there have been some positive rushes, but he was very quiet in that mock scrimmage, and it surprised me. I expected to see some big plays from 58, and it didn't happen, but maybe this is the practice where that light switch came on, and when the preseason comes on Thursday, we might see number 58 being that menace off the edge that we were expecting. So you couple that with the fact that Draymond Jones was out there today, one day after injuring his toe, was in full pads, played in the whole practice. That's another bullet that was dodged by the Seahawks. But overall, another pretty good day for this defensive line from a veteran and rookie standpoint that looks good for the Seahawks heading into this first preseason game as they continue to make progress with that pass rush, both on the outside and the interior. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be taking a dive into the latest Seahawks training camp, observations from the VMAC, and we'll be talking about what to watch on offense when the Seahawks open the preseason on Thursday night at Lumen Field against the Vikings. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.